Welcome to our review on surviving in a changing environment. First thing we need to do is understand what we mean by the term evolution. So whenever we're talking about evolution, we're talking about the gradual change of an organism over time. Bear in mind that evolution doesn't happen overnight. We're talking about something that's going to happen over many years. Now, we've got one famous scientist that hopefully we've all heard about before, of Charles Darwin. Now, Charles Darwin suggested the theory of natural selection to explain how evolution comes about. So if we think about this process of natural selection, then we can break it down into 4 key steps. The first step is all to do with large populations. So most species produce a lot of offspring. Now, what we notice when we look and see the numbers of these populations, then the population remains roughly the same despite the fact they produce a lot of offspring. So the next question we're led to is, why does that happen? The second step goes somewhat to explaining why, and that's all to do with survival. In that population, not all of the organisms will be able to survive and therefore reproduce. Now, if all of the organisms of a particular population die, then they will become extinct. Survival will be affected by a variety of different things. It could be affected by changes to the environment, could be affected by diseases, starvation, predation, a lack of mates being available so they can't reproduce. Any of those would affect the organism's ability to survive and therefore to reproduce. The third step looks at who's likely to survive. Now, within any given population, we've got variation, and that's all down to mutations within the genes. So some of those mutations that lead to those variations are an advantage. So that means they're more likely to survive. So any of those organisms that do have that advantage are more likely to survive, and therefore the ones without that advantage are more likely to die off because they're not able to compete as well. The final stage then looks at what then happens to pass on that advantage. So when we've got those organisms that are better adapted, they're the ones that will survive and they're the ones that are going to reproduce, which means that that advantage is then going to be passed to the offspring through their genes. So what we eventually find is, over a long period of time, all members of the population demonstrate that advantage, because it's only been those organisms that have the advantage that have survived. Those ones that have survived have been able to reproduce, and those that have reproduced have passed on the genes for the advantage. So if you remember those 4 stages of natural selection, then you should be able to get top marks on any question asking you about it. But do remember, natural selection has no interference from humans. This is what happens in nature without us there at all.